1941. Incredible as it may seem, these crates marked the start of the development of the first jet engine in America. They contained an experimental engine which was flown to the United States from Great Britain under great secrecy in the fall of 1941. This flight was the direct result of a conference in the Washington office of General Arnold a few weeks earlier. Here was the actual beginning of the jet story in America.
Gentlemen, I give you the Whittle engine. Consult all you wish. Arrive at any decision you please, just as long as General Electric accepts a contract to build 15 of them.
These were the plans of the first turbojet engine that had been successfully produced by any of the Allies. They were the results of a long, hard struggle by England's group captain, Frank Whittle. He had worked toward jet propulsion in the face of many difficulties, and he had succeeded. The Air Corps felt that jet propulsion had tremendous possibilities, and the British Air Ministry made all their information available to the United States. The men of General Electric knew from their with the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics that the essentials of a turbojet were a compressor and a turbine.
I cannot overemphasize the secrecy and the importance of this work. We know that both the Italians and the Germans are working on jets. I hardly need tell you that they must not win the race.
General, given unlimited priority, we will have the first unit running on test in 6 months.
6 unbelievably short months in all to plan, design, and build the first American jet engine for a revolutionary new principle of flight. Yet these men were able to make this promise to their government in time of war because actually this problem was not new to them. It really began on the campus of Cornell University in 1903, where a young mechanical engineer named Sanford Moss was working for his PhD. He was engaged in research for his thesis on gas turbines. He and his work had been consigned to this little building because there seemed to be a certain amount of noise connected with it. Not to mention smoke and odd smells. When he had completed his work at Cornell and received his degree, Moss went to General Electric, where he joined other experts and continued his work. Later, they set up a research department to study turbines of all kinds, as well as compressors, pumps, boilers, and related equipment. By 1918, Moss and his fellow workers had accumulated a tremendous amount of knowledge in relation to turbines and compressors, and as a result, he was called to Washington. There, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics initiated work with Dr. Moss on a practical turbo supercharger, which the Air Corps hoped would increase the altitude performance of its World War I fighters. A gasoline engine runs on a mixture of air and fuel which burns in a cylinder. At higher altitudes, the atmosphere becomes progressively thinner so that the engine cannot get enough air to burn as much gasoline as it should for maximum power. The turbo supercharger simply adds a compressor to the engine which packs or charges the thin air into the cylinders. This allows the engine to burn more fuel and deliver full power. The compressor is run by a turbine, which is turned by the exhaust gases of the engine. Moss's work on the turbo continued, and his improvements had a tremendous influence on aviation. In 1920, the Army established a world altitude record of 36,000 feet, proving the turbo and air so rarefied that the pilot became unconscious and fell almost 6 miles before pulling out. General Billy Mitchell's famous test, which demonstrated for the first time The tremendous importance of air power was actually made possible by Moss's turbos. Mitchell's plane had to come in at 15,000 feet in order to avoid theoretical anti-aircraft fire. To give a plane enough power to carry a 2,000-pound bomb at that altitude, Mitchell had General Electric turbos installed on new twin-engine Martin bombers, and the results made aviation history. With the beginning of World War II, the Air Force's interest in turbos was greatly intensified. They quickly became standard equipment on such outstanding aircraft as Republic's Thunderbolt, Lockheed's Lightning, Consolidated's Liberator, and old reliable, the Boeing Flying Fortress. The high-altitude daylight strategic bombing operations which destroyed the strength of our enemy in Europe would not have been possible without turbos. They have contributed immeasurably to the science of flight and continue to do so. They are used on some of today's finest piston engine planes. The most formidable weapon the world has ever seen was carried by a turbo supercharged plane. So in 1941, with a new but related problem, it was only natural for the Air Corps to again turn to the same organization and ask them to build the first American turbojet. And build it they did. At a series of secret meetings 1 month before the arrival of the Whittle engine, the project had been started with a small nucleus of key personnel. These men picked those they wanted to work with. However, in most cases, they did not let them know what they were to work on. There were over 1,000 men on the project, but less than 100 actually knew what they were making. Planning and assembly of the engine itself was segregated in an entirely separate building and heavily guarded 24 hours a day. Many of the parts were made in the regular supercharger department, but as a further protection, the project was called a new type of turbo and simply given another production number, Type I. All the vast resources of the company were thrown behind the project. The knowledge gained in years of production and design of giant turbines of every kind. The research laboratory for special metals. The experience gained in the manufacture and operation of thousands of turbo superchargers. And the vast store of knowledge of the consulting laboratories. During the actual design and manufacture under D.F. Warner, these great resources led to the modification and improvement of the Whittle engine. For example, the English had trouble with turbine bucket forgings because of the high temperatures involved. But it was an old story to these men, and their long experience with turbos hastened the solution to this problem. Also, the English impellers had been giving trouble because of cracking, but skilled craftsmen were already making hundreds of thousands of successful impellers for all types of superchargers. American techniques of rotor balancing were very advanced and contributed greatly to smoothness of operation. Yet in spite of the diversity and size of the operation, there was not a single failure in security. Today we realize even more fully than the pioneers the almost incalculable importance of that first American jet engine, the forerunner of the engines that power the military planes of today. Yet those early workers seemed to sense the true value of their work, and it brought them together. There was a wonderful spirit of common purpose, of cooperation between the people who did the work, Britain, our Air Force, and the men of General Electric. In this atmosphere, the engine grew at an unbelievable rate, until at last the first engine, right on schedule, rolled under heavy guard into the test cell. Now they would see the results of 6 months of round-the-clock effort. But they would see much more than that. They would see the birth of the jet engine in America. They would see the first really radical change in air power since the Wright brothers' flight so many years ago. They would see the first faint beginning of a whole new era in the age of flight. That is, they would see it if the engine ran. they needed was to see it fly. Meanwhile, under the same rigid secrecy, the Bell Aircraft Corporation had been designing, laying out and building the Air Comet to be powered by the new engine. They too had performed miracles of production in a startling new field.
I can't get used to working on a plane without a propeller.
Neither can I. I hope it flies.
There were a lot of other people who hoped it would fly too, from top brass to Joe Average Man walking along Main Street, USA. Of course, he wouldn't hear about this particular plane for 2 or 3 years, maybe never. But he's a guy who carries deep within him a hope and conviction that any plane America builds will fly. These are the original films of the first jet plane ever to fly in America. With that first flight on October 1st, 1942, less than a year from the start of the project, jet-propelled flight in America became a reality. They had gotten off to a flying start, but in a race, it's the stamina that counts. So everybody kept right on working. The original engine, the IA, delivered 1,400 pounds of thrust. It was soon followed by another engine with more power, the I-16 with 1,600 pounds of thrust. Then came the J-33 with 4,000 pounds of thrust, and the jet engine really came into its own. The first flight of the J-33 was in June of 1944 in a Lockheed F-80 Shooting Star, again less than a year from the start of the project. This outstanding plane set many records, such as coast to coast in 4.5 hours, and became our first operational jet fighter. In order to get the jet industry moving and in the interest of national defense, GE passed along its plans to other manufacturers. Allison Division began mass production of the J-33 engine to help meet production requirements of the F-80 Shooting Star. The British Whittle engine and the first engines designed by GE used compressors of the centrifugal type. In these, air enters the hub and is hurled radially outward. However, even prior to seeing the British engine, work on an axial compressor had been started with the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. In this compressor, air flows in a straight line to the rear. The axial compressor increases the engine's efficiency and handles a greater volume of air without increasing the engine's diameter. Long-range research led to an axial flow J-35, which powered the Republic Thunderbolt, and the Douglas Skystreak, holder at that time of the world's official speed record of 640 miles per hour. 8 of these powerful new jet engines were also used in Northrop's 100-ton Flying Wing and many other planes in the rapidly developing jet field. During these years of progress with land-based aircraft, the Navy had worked with the McDonnell Aircraft Corporation and Westinghouse to develop the Phantom. Proof that problems associated with carrier-based aircraft were not beyond solution came with the Phantom's first takeoff and landing from an aircraft carrier. Meanwhile, a school was established at General Electric to train the people who would install, operate, and service their new GE jet engines. One of the courses given is simply a general familiarization with the principles of jet propulsion and the jet engine.
Ever since man undertook the conquest of the air, he has had 2 primary considerations. First, the aircraft itself, and second, its method of propulsion. Needless to say, he has not always been successful. Sometimes the airframe itself has been unsatisfactory. At other times, the method of propulsion has lacked the necessary power. In this case, for example, it's extremely simple. While in this, it's so complex that it borders on confusion. Actually, the early attempts at propulsion by reaction were not associated with aircraft. And, as in the case of most of man's early endeavors, they led to some rather startling results. The principle itself is very simple. Newton's third law of motion states that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. For example, an ordinary rotary lawn sprinkler turns because of the reaction of the arm to the action of the jet of water. It does not turn because the water squirted out pushes against the air. It would spin just as well in a vacuum. Similarly, the jet plane flies because of the reaction to the jet. It does not fly because the jet pushes against the air behind it. The engine itself consists of two main rotating elements, the compressor and the turbine, which are both mounted on a single rotating shaft. Air is drawn in, compressed, and packed into the firing chambers where fuel is injected. The constantly burning fuel tremendously increases the energy of the enclosed gases, which rush through the turbine and out of the tail cone. The turbine, operating like a windmill, supplies the power to spin the compressor. The expanding gases pushing their way out of the rear at about 1,200 miles per hour give the plane its forward thrust.
This, then, is the simple principle of propulsion which changed the whole outlook of the aviation industry. By 1951, GE's production models were delivering more than 5,800 pounds of thrust, a five-fold increase in 10 years. These engines are being mass-produced at both Lynn, Massachusetts and the great new Lockland, Ohio plant, the jet center of the world. Lockland represents more than huge production facilities. It represents a new production plan. Thousands of suppliers and subcontractors contribute to the manufacture of the jet engines which are assembled at Lockland. Thus, all sources of supply, down to the smallest individually owned machine shops, are benefited by the program and kept mobilized for production. The Lockland plan is truly another milestone. Just as the engines which roll from its production lines are the end product of many milestones, the result of almost 50 years of the best thought and effort of executives, engineers, scientists, and skilled craftsmen doing the work they are best fitted for in their own way. This freedom of effort is, after all, the real heritage of all Americans, and the engines are living up to that heritage. Today, General Electric turbojets are doing their job powering the great new planes they were designed for. Such planes as the Republic XF-91, high-speed, high-altitude interceptor. The North American F-86D. The Martin XB-51 superfast tactical bomber. The North American Sabre, holder of the world's official speed record of 671 miles per hour and the 100-kilometer closed course of 635 miles per hour. The North American B-45 Tornado, the first operational jet bomber. The Boeing B-47 Stratojet bomber, which in 1949 flew non-stop coast to coast in 3 hours and 46 minutes. And the mighty Convair B-36, the intercontinental bomber, which is powered by 6 turbo-supercharged piston engines and 4 jets. These and others are the planes which must maintain the common security of the free peoples of the world and thereby ensure peace. In one 6-month period, 3 new GE engine designs were okayed for production, each powerful than the preceding one. The last of these is no larger than the model then in mass production, yet it delivers so much more thrust that it is not even in the same class. Even so, by the time any new engine is in mass production, still newer and better engines are on the way. Engines that will be a tribute to the life work of Dr. Moss, who died in 1946, 1 year after being awarded the Collier Trophy, aviation's highest award. Moss's work is finished, but there will always be others to carry on with new ideas. Perhaps we will travel from coast to coast in 3 or 4 hours of quiet, vibrationless comfort. Certainly our energetic and progressive aircraft industry will give us commercial jetliners as soon as the time is right. Even the atom may release its giant strength for aircraft. The Atomic Energy Commission, the Air Force, and General Electric are already cooperating on an atomic power plant for an aircraft to be built by Convair. NACA, the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics, and a number of private corporations are also making real contributions to this program. Developmental engineering moves forward with great new facilities such as GE's Aircraft Gas Turbine Laboratory. Here engineers can simulate conditions for tomorrow's aircraft. Here men look ahead at the requirements of the planes of the future, requirements established by the product planners of the engine builders. of the airframe builders and of the aircraft users. These are the molders of aviation progress. As long as imagination, research, design, test, and mass production continue year after year in a never-ending, constantly improving chain, there is no limit to the future of the aircraft engine. And so the jet story grows. In 10 years, we have come from this to this. No one can foretell the tremendous strides the aircraft industry will make in the next 10 years. Yet we can be sure that the engines will keep pace. The engines that are keeping and will always keep America strong.
Pagiku cerahku, matahari bersinar, ku gendong tas merahku di pundak. Selamat pagi semua, ku nantikan dirimu di depan kelasmu, menantikan kami. Guruku tersayang, guru tercinta, tanpamu apa jadinya aku? Tak bisa baca tulis, mengerti banyak